Welcome to Mastermind Conversations, a Pro Insights podcast, powered by Geek in New York, where we don't just talk, we geek it. We break down complex topics, research from trusted sources, and bring your expert insights, real-life stories, and actionable tips, all in a clear and engaging way. So get ready, it's time to geek it with Mastermind Conversations.
So you're looking into autism therapy options for your child, huh? Maybe even right now, searching for something like Kids Autism Therapy, Columbus, Ohio, ABA therapy.
Yeah, it can feel overwhelming.
Like you're trying to piece together this, really complicated puzzle. And of course, you want the most effective support. Ideally, something local, highly recommended, all that. And it's easy to get lost, especially when you're just starting out.
Absolutely. I mean, where do you even begin?
Right. So that's what we're doing here in this deep dive. We're taking a good hard look at ABA therapy. Applied behavior analysis.
It comes up a lot.
Oh, constantly. It's often one of the first things recommended.
For good reason. There's a lot of research behind it.
But we're not going to bury you in jargon or anything. We really just want to unpack what ABA is, at its core, why it's used. Some practical things to consider as you're exploring different options.
Exactly.
Consider this your shortcut to feeling well-informed.
Like a guided tour?
Yeah, exactly. We'll pull out the key insights from the science behind ABA and then connect it to how it actually works, in real life.
Because that's what matters.
Totally. And hey, speaking of connecting with effective services, ones that are well-regarded and all that.
Oh, yeah.
We got to mention Advanced Behavioral Therapy in Toms River. They consistently get these amazing 5-star reviews. So if you're in that area looking for local ABA therapy and you want a place with a really strong reputation, they're definitely worth checking out. Their number is 380-799-8555.
All right, so let's get into the science behind ABA. What are we really talking about here?
Yeah, break it down for us.
Okay, at its heart, ABA is really all about understanding behavior.
Okay.
And how the environment, everything around us, influences it.
Right.
When we say science here, it's not just like lab coats and microscopes. It's really a specific way of approaching knowledge, like a framework guided by some key principles. Instead of just guessing why a certain behavior is happening, we try to figure out the actual causes through observation and testing.
Right. And I noticed our sources talk about these attitudes of science. It sounds a little academic, maybe, but when you really think about it, it's about being systematic and open-minded in how you approach things.
Exactly. So one of these attitudes is determinism.
Okay, determinism.
Which basically means that behavior doesn't just happen randomly. There are reasons for it, even if we don't know them yet.
Okay, so there's a cause and effect.
Right. And then there's empiricism. That emphasizes the importance of relying on what we can actually see and measure.
So objective evidence.
Yes. Not just gut feelings or assumptions.
Makes sense. What else?
Well, experimentation is obviously huge. It's about setting up controlled situations to try to isolate what specific changes are actually making a difference in behavior.
Got it.
Replication is really important too, because you need to see those results happen more than once. You want to be confident it's not just a fluke.
Oh, for sure. You need that consistency to be sure it's actually working.
Right. Then we have parsimony. I love this one. It's basically about looking for the simplest explanation first. Don't overcomplicate things unnecessarily.
That's a good rule for life in general, I think.
Totally. And finally, there's philosophical doubt. Always be willing to question what you think you know, and update your understanding when new evidence comes along.
Keep learning, keep questioning.
Exactly. So these attitudes form the backbone of ABA research and also how practitioners approach their work.
It's a mindset.
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so let's talk about functional relations.
Yes, this is key.
What does that really mean for, someone who's trying to understand their child's behavior?
Okay, imagine you're a detective. You're trying to solve a case. A functional relation is like finding that clear connection between something in the environment and a specific behavior.
Okay, so what triggers a behavior?
Yeah, and what happens afterwards that might make it more likely to happen again. It's often changes in the environment, things being introduced or taken away, that have the biggest impact.
So it's not just that a child, say, has access to a certain toy, but it could be the excitement of getting the toy or the frustration when it's taken away.
Exactly. You're getting it.
It's the context, the change.
Yes. And this is where B.F. Skinner comes in.
Okay, Skinner.
He was a huge figure in behaviorism. He developed this concept of operant behavior.
Which is?
It basically means that our behaviors operate on the environment. and the consequences of those actions determine whether we do them again.
So it's like a feedback loop.
Exactly. He did a lot of experiments with animals, observing how they learned through rewards and punishments, and this work formed the foundation for much of what we do in ABA today.
It's amazing how those early studies still influence how we think about learning.
It really is. And Skinner also talked about radical behaviorism.
Radical.
I know, it sounds intense, but radical here just means all-encompassing. He believed that to really understand behavior, we need to consider everything.
Okay.
Not just the actions we can see, but also thoughts and feelings, what he called private events. We can't directly observe those private events, obviously. But he argued they're still part of behavior, influenced by the same principles.
Okay. So, with all of that as background, how would you define applied behavior analysis, like in a way that's clear and helpful for someone who's looking into therapy options?
So, ABA is the science of applying techniques from behavior analysis in a systematic way to improve socially significant behaviors. And experimentation is used to identify what's causing those improvements.
It's not just about doing something, it's about understanding why it works.
Exactly. And there are a few key components in that definition. It's a science, it's systematic, meaning there's a plan, and it's based on those principles we were talking about.
Okay.
It focuses on behaviors that are important in a person's life, like things that really matter for their well-being and their ability to function.
Right, so those are the socially significant behaviors.
Yeah, and then of course the goal is to make those behaviors better and to understand why those changes are happening.
It's not just trial and error, it's about the data. Okay, so when we talk about actually using ABA in practice, what are some of the core ideas that parents might hear about?
One of the most fundamental is reinforcement. Basically, anything that makes a behavior more likely to happen again.
The good stuff.
Right. And our sources talk about different types of reinforcers.
Okay.
So you have unconditioned reinforcers, things we're born liking, like food or comfort. And then there are conditioned reinforcers, things we learn to like because they're associated with other good things.
So like praise.
Exactly. Or toys, or even just a smile. But the important thing to remember is a reinforcer is defined by how it changes behavior.
So if a behavior increases after you provide something, then that something is a reinforcer.
Precisely.
It's about what motivates that specific child, even if it's not what you'd expect.
Exactly.
Now, what about when we want a child to use a new skill in different situations, not just in therapy?
That's generalization. It means the learned behavior keeps happening over time in different places with different people. It might even extend to other similar behaviors.
So it's not just a one-trick pony.
Exactly. It shows the learning is meaningful and actually useful in their everyday life. That's a key goal in ABA.
It's got to translate to the real world. Now, another thing I noticed is that ABA really emphasizes measuring behavior. Why is that so important?
Measurement is crucial. It gives us objective information to track progress and make decisions.
So data-driven.
Exactly. If we want to improve a child's life, we need to see if what we're doing is working. Our sources talk about some basic ways to measure behavior, like how often it happens, that's called repeatability or count, how long it lasts, that's temporal extent or duration, and then when it occurs, which is temporal locus.
Okay, so instead of just saying a child is having more tantrums, you're actually tracking how long they last and when they tend to happen.
Yeah, that's the idea. And there are different methods for collecting that data. We might just count how many times behavior happens, that's event recording, or track how long it lasts, that's duration, or look at the percentage of correct responses, or how many tries it takes to learn something new.
Makes sense.
Then there's time sampling.
Time sampling.
It's about observing at specific times and recording whether the behavior is happening at that moment. There are a few different types, like whole interval, partial interval, momentary time sampling.
Okay.
And it's important to note that these methods can sometimes underestimate how often a behavior actually occurs.
And what about permanent product measurement?
Ah, yes. That means we're looking at the result of a behavior after it's happened.
So like, if you're working on cleaning up toys, you just look at whether the toys are in the toy box at the end.
Exactly. It's efficient because you don't have to be watching the whole time.
Right. And there are also ways to describe the behavior itself, right? Like topography and magnitude.
You got it. Topography is what the behavior looks like. Its form or shape. Magnitude is how intense it is.
Okay.
These help define what we're observing before we start counting or timing anything.
And then there's acceleration.
Right. Acceleration is how the rate of a behavior is changing. It's super useful for seeing if our intervention is leading to faster learning or a quicker reduction in problem behaviors.
So there's a lot of science involved in just observing and recording behavior accurately.
Absolutely. And that leads us to the idea of trustworthy measurement.
Okay, trustworthy measurement.
It's all about making sure our data is valid, accurate, and reliable. Validity means we're measuring what we intend to measure. Accuracy means our measurements are true. And reliability means we get consistent measurements across time and observers.
And that's where inter-observer agreement comes in, right? IOA.
Yes. It's basically a way to check if different people are recording the same behavior in the same way. We have them observe independently and then compare their data.
So the more agreement, the more confidence you have in the data.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But of course, it's not a perfect system. There are things that can influence measurement, like observer drift, where someone unintentionally changes how they define or record a behavior over time, or just knowing what the expected outcome is. That can unconsciously bias how someone records data. That's why ongoing training and checks are so important.
To keep everyone on the same page.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've talked about the science behind ABA and how behavior is measured, but how do you know what to focus on with a child? That's where assessment comes in, right?
Yes. Assessment is about gathering information, to really understand a child's strengths and challenges.
Right.
Identify specific behaviors to work on, and figure out what might be influencing those behaviors. We have indirect and direct assessment.
Okay, what's the difference?
Indirect assessment is gathering information from people who know the child well, parents, teachers, caregivers. We're not observing the behavior directly, but getting their perspectives.
Through interviews, maybe?
Yes, often. Asking them about what the behavior looks like, when it happens, and what usually happens before and after. We might also use checklists or rating scales.
So it's about getting their insights and memories. And then direct assessment is when you actually see the behavior happening.
Exactly. That involves observing the child in their natural environment and recording those behaviors, what they do, and the context.
And I remember reading about stimulus preference assessment.
Oh, yes. That's all about figuring out what things a child might find motivating or rewarding.
What they like, what they want.
Exactly. We need to know this so we can use those things as reinforcers.
Makes sense. How do you figure that out?
There are a few ways. We might present items one at a time and see how they react, or present 2 items and ask them to choose, or let them have free access to a bunch of things and see what they interact with most.
So you get a sense of their preferences.
Right.
And then there's functional behavior assessment, or FBA.
That's crucial. The main goal of an FBA is to figure out the function of a behavior.
Okay.
What is the child getting or avoiding by doing that behavior?
The why behind the behavior.
Yes. Once we understand the function, then we can develop interventions that address the root cause.
So, for example, is the child seeking attention, trying to escape a difficult task, or trying to get something they want?
Exactly. And once we know the function, we can teach them a more appropriate way to get that same outcome.
So it's not just about stopping the behavior, but giving them a better way to get their needs met.
Precisely.
All right, so we've assessed the behavior. We think we understand why it's happening. Now we can start talking about how ABA helps to create change.
Right.
What are some of the intervention strategies?
Well, a lot of interventions are based on the principle of reinforcement. Positive reinforcement is adding something the child likes after a desired behavior to make it more likely they'll do it again. And then there's negative reinforcement.
Okay.
That's about removing something unpleasant after behavior, which also makes that behavior more likely. But we got to be mindful of the ethical considerations there.
Right. We want to make sure it's being used appropriately and not causing any harm.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Then you have different schedules of reinforcement, like how often you provide the reinforcement.
Yeah. Schedules of reinforcement. Okay.
There are fixed ratio schedules where you give reinforcement after a certain number of correct responses.
Okay.
Variable ratio, where it's given after an average number of responses.
It's like a slot machine.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know when you'll win, but you keep playing. Then there are fixed interval schedules, where reinforcement is available after a set amount of time has passed, and variable interval schedules, where it's after an average amount of time.
So it's about finding the right pattern for that child and that behavior.
Yeah, these different schedules influence how consistently a behavior happens.
Okay, and then there are things like differential reinforcement.
Yes. Differential reinforcement is basically reinforcing one behavior and not reinforcing another.
So you're being selective about what you reinforce.
Exactly. So with differential reinforcement of alternative behavior, we might reinforce a child for asking nicely for a toy instead of grabbing it.
Oh, I see.
Or with differential reinforcement of other behavior, we might reinforce a child for not engaging in a problem behavior for a certain amount of time.
Interesting.
And with differential reinforcement of low rates, we might reinforce them for, say, asking for attention only a few times instead of constantly.
So you're shaping the behavior in a more manageable direction.
Exactly.
What about extinction? I saw that mentioned in the research.
Oh, yeah. Extinction is when you stop providing the reinforcement that was maintaining a behavior.
So you're basically cutting off the supply.
Right. And it's important to know that when you first start using extinction, the behavior might get worse before it gets better. It's called an extinction burst. There can also be other temporary side effects.
You have to be prepared for that.
Yeah.
What about when you're teaching a new skill? How does that work?
Well, that's where prompting and fading come in.
Okay, explain those.
Prompting is basically giving some kind of assistance to help the child do the behavior correctly.
So like a little nudge in the right direction?
Yeah, exactly. It could be a physical prompt, a verbal cue, even a visual aid. And fading is when you gradually remove those prompts as the child starts to get it on their own.
Makes sense.
There are different fading techniques, like errorless learning, where you fade prompts super quickly, at least to most prompting, where you start with minimal assistance and increase if needed, and most to least prompting, where you start with a lot of support and gradually reduce it.
Interesting. So many different approaches. What about discrimination training? That sounds important for helping kids understand like different situations and how to respond.
Absolutely. Discrimination training teaches a child to respond differently based on different cues. Like, simple discrimination is learning to respond to one specific stimulus and not others.
Okay.
But conditional discrimination is more complex. It involves responding based on multiple cues.
Give me an example.
Sure, a child might learn to point to a picture of a dog when you say, "Show me the dog," but only if there isn't also a picture of a cat there as a distraction. Matching the sample tasks are often used to teach this.
Okay, so it's about being able to differentiate between things. And then there's shaping and chaining, right?
Yes. Shaping is how we teach new behaviors by reinforcing behaviors that are closer and closer to the target behavior.
So you're kind of building it up in stages.
Exactly. You start by rewarding anything that's even remotely close, and then gradually require more and more before they get the reinforcement. Chaining is used for multi-step tasks. You break it down into smaller steps, teach each step, and then link them all together.
Okay, so it's a step-by-step process. What about token economies, response cost, and timeout? I feel like those are terms parents hear a lot.
Yeah, those are all different intervention strategies too.
Okay, go through them for us.
A token economy is a system where the child earns tokens for good behavior, and then they can exchange those tokens for things they want.
So it's like a reward system.
Exactly. Response cost is the opposite. It's like a fine, where you take away something the child likes as a consequence for a problem behavior. Timeout involves removing the child from a reinforcing situation for a short period of time. There are different types of timeout, and it's important that it's used ethically and safely with clear procedures.
Of course. Safety and ethics are always paramount. What about those other terms I saw? High probability instruction sequence and verbal behavior.
Right. A high probability instruction sequence is basically giving the child a bunch of instructions they're really likely to follow, and then slipping in one they're less likely to follow. It can increase their compliance with that harder task.
Interesting.
And verbal behavior is a whole area of study based on Skinner's analysis of language. It looks at the function of communication, like is the child making a request, labeling something, imitating sounds, answering questions, or following directions. Learning to make requests or manding is often seen as a super important step. It opens the door to so many other communication skills.
It's like a foundational skill.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, and one last term I saw. Automatic reinforcement.
Yes. That's when the behavior itself produces a reinforcing consequence without any social interaction. So, for example, flapping hands might produce a sensory experience that's reinforcing for a child.
It's internally reinforcing.
Exactly.
Wow, that was a really thorough overview of all the different techniques and strategies used in ABA therapy.
I hope it wasn't too much.
No, it was great. It was really helpful. I think for families in Columbus, Ohio, who are searching for kids autism therapy, Columbus, Ohio, ABA therapy, understanding these basics is so important.
Absolutely. It helps you evaluate different programs and know what questions to ask.
Right. And for those listeners who might be closer to Tom's River, remember, advanced behavioral therapy has that fantastic reputation with all those 5-star reviews. You can call them at 380-799-8555 for local ABA therapy.
And wherever you are, when you're looking for providers, whether it's in Columbus or somewhere else, it's so important to ask about their approach.
What should you be asking?
Ask about their assessment process, how they develop treatment plans, how they involve families in the therapy. Make sure they have board-certified behavior analysts, BCBAs. And don't be afraid to ask questions about their experience and their approach.
Right.
Understanding the science, like we've been talking about, is really empowering.
It helps you make informed choices. And again, for those near Toms River, Advanced Behavioral Therapy has those 5-star reviews, and their number is 380-799-8555.
I'm glad you mentioned that. It's so important to find a provider you feel comfortable with and a team you trust. Even though we've been focusing on the science, the human element is crucial.
Oh, absolutely.
I noticed Advanced Behavioral Therapy talks about being passionate about helping families thrive, and they value having a supportive team.
Yeah.
That really stood out to me.
Yeah.
It shows they understand that effective ABA is about more than just applying techniques.
It's about genuine care and connection.
Exactly. It's about professionals who are dedicated to the well-being of the child and the whole family. And that's what you want.
For sure. So as we wrap up this deep dive into ABA therapy, what are the key takeaways you'd want listeners to remember?
Well, the main thing is that ABA is grounded in science. It's about understanding and changing behavior to improve the lives of individuals with autism.
Right.
And it's systematic. There's a process of assessment, data-driven interventions, teaching new skills, reducing problem behaviors. It's all about making a real difference in the child's life.
It's so interesting to me how these principles of behavior can be applied in so many areas of life, not just autism therapy.
That's so true. How we learn, what motivates us. These are relevant to understanding behavior in all sorts of contexts.
Absolutely. It's a new lens to see the world through.
I think so.
So for listeners who are just beginning their journey, exploring options for their child, what advice would you give them?
Do your research, ask questions, and find qualified professionals. And don't forget about the human element. It's crucial to find a provider you trust, a team you feel good about. And if you happen to be in the Toms River area, remember Advanced Behavioral Therapy and their great reputation. Their number is 380-799-8555.
Thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your expertise.
It was my pleasure.
We hope this deep dive has been helpful for everyone out there who's trying to make sense of ABA therapy and find the best support for their child. Thanks for listening, everyone.
That's a wrap for this episode of Mastermind Conversations, a Pro Insights podcast powered by Geek in New York, where we don't just talk, we geek it. We hope you gain valuable insights, learn something new, and are ready to apply it in business and life. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, share, and leave a review. It helps us bring you even more great content. Until next time, stay curious, keep learning, and always geek it.